between 24, 25 when I went to the shelter. I had bruises, black marks everywhere that I got beaten with a water hose. I mean, I was down on a stairs, on the bottom of a stairs with my neck like that, just not taking the poison down. And you know what I said? If I die, he would go to jail, the same thing, and my child will suffer. But I saw death in that house. I used to be talking to a social worker, and she referred me to the shelter, and she gave me 2 bus tickets, and she said, close the door behind you. I went down by the bus station, I got the bus. I said, God is with me, and I held my son's hand, and we ran up that road. And the girls, and they were so welcoming. And they took me in and nurtured me. They nurtured me. They fed me. They nursed me. They clothed me. Everything. I stayed there for 6 months. And I was hard.
Well, that sets the tone for the conversation we're about to have. The shelter, a safe haven, a safe place for women to go to in situations of domestic violence. We have with us this morning executive member of the shelter, Ms. Shireen Pollard. Good morning to you. Welcome to the Now Morning Show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
First of all, let's just get a little bit of history on the shelter. How long has it been in existence, and what's the kind of work that you guys do?
Sure. It was opened in 1987, actually, by Miss Diana Mahabir Wyatt. Our current chairman is Mr. Colin Mitchell. We can hold up to 20 residents. Our residents are allowed to stay at the shelter with us for periods of 3 months up to 9 months. So within that time, they receive counseling, they receive social interventions to address the behaviors and the issues that cause them to come to the shelter.
Interesting. I mean,
that part of it too, really, because you see the behaviors that cause them to come to the shelter.
Well, I shouldn't, not the behaviors that they engage in, but the behaviors that
would have affected them.
That would have affected them to cause them to come to the shelter.
I mean, my next question would have been, what kind of behaviors do you usually see? Or, for example,
From
what kind of victims are coming? Coming to the shelter.
Well, we receive a variety of victims because domestic violence can be in several forms. So we receive victims who may have been victims of physical violence, maybe financial abuse, psychological abuse. So there are many different forms of domestic violence that may cause someone to have to come to our shelter.
And is the time period you're talking about there 3 months to 9 months? Has that been effective, that we don't see people end up relapsing or ended up back in situations that they don't want to be in?
We have. If we understand the victimology as it relates to domestic violence, we see that victims, sometimes it takes them 7 times to leave and go back before they leave for good. Wow. So we have had in the past, we've had victims who were probably at the shelter before, and because we understand that victimology, we encourage them to come back every single time that they need to.
Now, in terms of the services that you offer, is it that you offer counseling services, rehab services? I mean, how far is it? Is it as far as trying to get them a job when they get back on their feet, sort of thing?
Yes, absolutely. So they receive crisis intervention when they first come to the shelter, because as you know, leaving a home, even if you're leaving a home by yourself or leaving a home with children, that in itself is traumatic. So they receive a series of crisis interventions, and then what we do is we create individualized case plans for each resident. Because some residents, their needs may be different than others. Some people may have underlying factors, mental health issues, they may need life skills. We work with a lot of ministries actually in ensuring that our residents receive the services that they need. So we may have to collaborate with the Ministry of Education because we may need to change a school for a child to go to. The Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, where we may look at ensuring that our residents receive grants to help them. One of the things that we are actually actively working on now is partnering with the Ministry of Housing and hoping that our residents can receive some kind of permanent housing once they leave the shelter.
What about security at the shelter? Like, how do you mitigate people, the perpetrators coming to find them at the shelter or whatever the case may be?
Well, it's a confidential location.
Right.
So we have very specific drivers that that take residents to the shelter. While they're at the shelter, unfortunately, we take away things like maybe cell phones, just also because we want them to focus on the treatment that they're receiving while at the shelter. So confidentiality is very, very important, and our staff understands that. So that's how we really try to keep that.
Nice.
I wonder if after the treatment is done, you give back your cell phone, you get back access to social media, you get back access to all the people you used to have access to. Does that help or hurt the process?
Well, I think it depends on the individual. So they receive skills where, they understand that they need to be empowered, and maybe, they need to focus on themselves and focus on their children. And I think that really helps them kind of stay in a bubble and work on themselves. Yeah.
So it creates a bubble for them.
Yes,
creates a
correct.
bubble. Now, in terms of the children, some women are allowed to come with their children to the shelter.
Yes, of course.
Do you have specific services to offer the children while they're staying there at that point?
Well, we want to make sure we don't disrupt the children's lives as much as it's already been disrupted. So now that, we really haven't had this issue because of COVID and school was closed, and now that schools are reopened, what we want to do is we want to make sure that there are things in place where the children can continue to go to school, where they can continue to, they can also receive counseling, because, we say a lot of time domestic violence, it doesn't just affect the woman, it affects the children as well. So the emotions that they're experiencing, just based on what their experience, is very important for them to.
Are there common factors that you guys would have encountered in dealing with the victims of domestic violence?
I wouldn't say that they're common factors, because domestic violence can happen to anyone. Right. So what we see is residents coming from all over the country, from all different walks of life. So I really won't say that there's a common factor.
Are there men available, who come to the shelter seeking your assistance?
For now, we only accept women and children. Yeah.
I mean, Ruckus and I were talking earlier about the fact that one of the things that would have caused the increase in domestic violence, and this was global, was the COVID-19 pandemic.
Absolutely.
And so is there a peak period where you would see more people coming to the shelter than others?
Yes and no, only because the shelter went through a very big renovation during the COVID. So we weren't actually open for COVID. Wow. So we weren't able to compare, statistics from pre-COVID to post-COVID. Yeah. But I just think nationally we have seen an increase in domestic violence complaints during COVID.
But in terms of, so now that we have more cases being reported and we're seeing the incidents in the newspaper, would you find more women wanting to get out of that situation and find a shelter for themselves?
Absolutely, and we encourage that. We know it's a very difficult thing. It's a life-changing thing, It's very difficult to go into the unknown. You're not sure, you're leaving your home, you're disrupting your children's lives. But what we really do is try to provide a safe space where they feel comfortable, where they don't feel like they have to go back into a situation that is dangerous and potentially fatal.
You said that you have space for 20 people.
20 residents, correct.
At the shelter. What happens when you're filled to capacity?
When we are filled, unfortunately, we can't take anyone else. So what we do is we try to make sure services are in place and women receive the skills that they can get, so we can discharge them and have other residents come in. But there are also other shelters throughout Trinidad that,
so
even if we're filled
together to be able to say, well, all right, I can recommend that we can't take you, but I can recommend that you go by X or you go by Y.
Absolutely. And what Trinidad has an 800 national domestic violence hotline. It's 800-SAVE. So we do, if we're unable to facilitate a resident coming into our shelter, we encourage them to call this number, and that number would put them to, probably connect them to the gender-based violence unit of the TTPS or to another shelter within Trinidad.
Now, when the victim leaves the shelter, are there any check-in services that you do to ensure that they stay on track with the plan that you would have created for them?
Yes, absolutely. So the shelter, one thing about the shelter, we are available whenever you need. So even if you're not staying with us as a resident and you feel like you need services, or maybe you just need items or you need someone to speak to, we are definitely available.
In terms of the resources that are available, because in most instances of domestic violence, the men would have been the breadwinner. And so they're coming there, they are maybe they're strapped for finances. Do you help in that aspect as well?
That is actually a real concern, so thank you. It's not that we provide monetary, I guess, value, money or cash, but what we do is we try to empower the women to get a job or to find a job or to just hone in on the skills that they have
while they're at the shelter.
Right. Or when they're leaving. Because what we don't want is we don't want someone to go into a relationship just for, financial means, and then they're at the hands of an abuser and or perpetrator, correct. So as much as we could empower women to be independent, I think that, and earn money on their own, I think that is definitely a barrier in becoming, a domestic violence victim.
I'm still concerned about the security aspect of things because, when even if you say, all right, you're going to empower somebody to get a job, how do you get a job in a place that you're not going to bounce up the perpetrator by accident, or how do you mitigate those factors?
Well, these are things we look at the case-to-case basis, right? So we know maybe if someone is living in San Fernando and the perpetrator is known to be in San Fernando or live in San Fernando, maybe we'll look at trying to find permanent housing for them, I don't know, maybe in Arima or in Port of Spain or something like that. So it really is to try to cut as much ties as possible to the abusive situation that they were in.
Now, Ms. Pollard, where is the shelter located? And for any woman
confidential.
who's watching,
I was going to say
the question is, for any woman who's looking right now and they want to get the services of the shelter, where can they, is there a number to call, a website or anything?
We do not have I don't have a public number that I can give out, but we can, they can actually send an email to admin@trinidadshelter.com. They can also call 800-SAVE, which is a national domestic violence hotline that is run by OPM's Child and Gender Affairs, and they can ask for more information on the shelter. So again, that number is 800-SAVE.
And it's admin@trinidadshelter.com?
Correct.
So they can send an email there requesting your services or
just information. Even if you give a contact number with a good time that you would like for us to call you, we would call you right back.
All right. And 800-SAVE is a toll-free hotline that you can call at any point in time.
Absolutely.
24/7.
24/7, and anyone can call.
All right. This is, I mean, we know that it's a lot to unpack. Are there any plans, or do you know of any safe houses, any shelters, not the shelter, but any other shelters that facilitate men?
Not that I'm aware of right now. Currently, I know that the Office of the Permanent Child and Gender Affairs there have been discussions about opening a domestic violence shelter for male victims.
No, but this is also part of the situation, right?
Yeah.
This is also part of the problem, is that we often only see men as perpetrators and not as victims. And the fact that we don't have anything in place for those men that may be victims is part, I think, of the problem. But I think women of victims of domestic violence, the numbers are disproportionate towards women. So I think, resources have been kind of focused where the need has been. But I do understand the need for male victims to have a safe place as well. How do we deal with perpetrators? How do we I don't want to say fix them, but
so when it comes to perpetrators of domestic violence, one social intervention, and it has been proven to be effective, is batterer's intervention. So this is where, someone who may be a male perpetrator or alleged of committing a domestic violence crime, they go and they receive counseling, they receive any skills to address the behavior, because when we, in domestic violence cases, there are many underlying factors. For some people, it may be substance abuse can lead to domestic violence, mental health issues can lead to domestic violence. So what the batterer's intervention program does is it will address that problem. Even in speaking to male perpetrators, sometimes they may not even know what they're doing, not to make an excuse, but sometimes
they don't know that it's wrong.
They don't know that it's wrong. They may not know that it's wrong, or they may not understand that their behaviors are manipulative. So batterer's intervention is something that I think can address the perpetrators. We also could, you know, arrest them and put them into jail because it is a crime.
Yeah.
Of course.
I don't know that necessarily helps the situation, but I do understand that it's a form of recourse. I think that, you know, what Inspector Lewis mentioned earlier, you know, it's in terms of getting counseling for both perpetrators and victims as well. I think they're equally important, because something is wrong with you if you think that it's okay to manipulate, to abuse, and whether it be emotionally, physically, or financially.
Well, if you're physically abusing a woman, then, you know, that's a crime. So that's
All
physical assault.
Something is wrong.
The financial part is a crime too, not
so,
Yeah.
so I definitely think, you know, for us to treat domestic violence as a crime, I think sends a very strong message nationally, and it's definitely something that I am a proponent of.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing,
Thank
and
you.
continue to do the great work that you guys are doing at the shelter.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
That's Shireen Pollard, executive member at the shelter, just sharing a little bit of information with us. And if you want to get in contact with them, you can send an email to admin@trinidadshelter.com, or you can simply call 800-SAVE. That's 800-7283. We'll take a quick break and come back with more inside the Now Morning Show. Stay tuned.